All right, let's dive right into this. Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're taking the incredibly complex, swirling chaos of global events and breaking them down so you can actually see the bigger picture. We're zeroing in on a single day that perfectly captures the friction of our entire global economy right now. Analysts are calling it Wild Wednesday, and we are going to unpack exactly why this specific day is such a massive friction point for the markets, our global power grid, and the geopolitical order. So, think about this for a second. What actually happens when three massive, seemingly unstoppable global forces crash into each other all at exactly the same time? You've got an unprecedented artificial intelligence spending spree, a dramatic fracturing of the global energy order, and then the heavy, immovable gravity of the Federal Reserve and global debt. How do these things interact? Well, let's start with a number that sets the sheer scale of this collision.
$190 billion. Yeah, billion with a B. That is Google's newly raised spending limit for AI data centers for this year alone. Just let that scale sink in for a moment. This big tech infrastructure arms race is happening at a pace and a price tag that honestly rivals historic national endeavors, like the Apollo space program. But that's just one piece of the puzzle.
Here is our roadmap for the explainer. We're going to hit the maelstrom of Wild Wednesday, look at big tech's AI spending spree, check out the energy shocks and megatrends, face the looming debt wall, examine the Fed's dramatic stand, and wrap up with consumer resilience. Okay, starting with Section 1, the maelstrom of Wild Wednesday, a maelstrom of chaos at market highs.
What is truly fascinating here is the sheer concentration of market-moving events landing on one single day. On the surface, the stock market looks incredibly robust, right? The Nasdaq Composite jumped 14% in April, which tracked for its 8th best month on record. But underneath those record highs, it's a completely different story. You've got 4 of the Magnificent 7 mega-cap tech companies reporting earnings, the Federal Reserve making a highly contested interest rate decision, the United Arab Emirates suddenly fracturing the OPEC alliance, and an ongoing Middle East war with Iran pushing oil prices up. It is literally a collision of our highest digital ambitions and some very harsh physical real-world constraints.
Moving right along to Section 2, Big Tech's AI spending spree, the AI engine. As those big tech earnings rolled in on Wild Wednesday, we got a rare glimpse into the minds of the executives driving this AI engine. Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella actually dropped the term a Valmax in his earnings statement. Now, if you haven't heard that before, it's a piece of corporate jargon that comes from token maxing, which is basically tech bro slang for squeezing the absolute maximum output from an AI model. A Microsoft spokesperson later clarified that for them, it means driving the best outcomes and results for customers with AI. It's kind of quirky slang, sure, but it underscores the aggressive, almost singular focus these companies have right now. They want to maximize their AI capabilities no matter the cost. But here's the catch. The market isn't treating all AI spending equally. Not at all. There is a very sharp divide right now between AI infrastructure providers and AI infrastructure spenders. Alphabet, Google's parent company, saw a massive 63% surge in cloud computing revenue, heavily driven by AI demand. Amazon saw its fastest cloud revenue growth in years at 28%. The market rewarded them because they have these massive cloud units to immediately offset their colossal capital expenditures. But on the flip side, Meta was punished. Their stock dropped significantly. Why? Well, Meta raised its annual CapEx projection to a midpoint of $135 billion for AI, but they lack a booming cloud unit to instantly monetize that infrastructure. So the market is getting super jittery about spending that doesn't show immediate, tangible returns. Which brings us to Section 3. Energy shocks and megatrends, or the physical reality. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly where digital ambition meets physical reality. Because all of those AI data centers, they require massive amounts of power. But AI is actually just one part of a much larger megatrend. Look at this. Current global electricity consumption sits at about 20,000 terawatt hours. By 2040, driven by population growth in places like India and global electrification, we are going to need an extra 18,000 terawatt hours. But interestingly, veteran hedge fund manager Renaud Saleur points out that AI data centers will likely only require about 1,000 of that extra 18,000. So the real megatrend here is just basic human electrification, people turning on lights and plugging in appliances across the developing world. And to make that physical reality happen, we need commodities. Saleur notes,
At the end of the day, what we know is that to transport this extra electricity, we will need 100 million kilometers of new cables. Just picture that for a second. That is literally equivalent to 2 times the entire world's yearly consumption of copper. We are talking about a highly physical, dirt-under-the-fingernails reality of mining copper, mining aluminum, and manufacturing cables just to keep the lights and all those servers running.
So how do we actually generate all that power as we simultaneously try to move away from fossil fuels? Well, the data points straight toward a nuclear renaissance. Let's trace the history of uranium prices for a little context. Back during the 1973 oil shock, uranium was just $4 a pound. By 1997, it hit $77. Today, it's sitting around $85. But here's the kicker. Because you cannot just open a new uranium mine or build a nuclear reactor in less than 10 years, we are facing a massive yearly shortage. Because of this bottleneck, analysts are projecting uranium could skyrocket to $200 per pound by the end of 2027. Meanwhile, the old energy order is actively fracturing. On Wild Wednesday, the UAE officially exited the OPEC alliance. This is a massive geopolitical shift. OPEC normally controls the market by strictly rationing production, right? But the UAE wants to lift its production capacity to 5 million barrels a day by 2027. By leaving, they are unshackling their energy wealth. Now, right now, this extra supply isn't crashing oil prices because the ongoing war with Iran has pushed Brent crude above $104 a barrel. But this long-term restructuring of global oil, combined with these supply shocks, it signals serious rising inflation risks for the future. And that's the kind of inflation that eventually hits everything, from manufacturing costs right down to your local gas pump. On to Section 4, the looming debt wall, the macro wall. Now, obviously, all of this AI spending, the energy transition, dealing with geopolitical conflicts, it all requires money, which leads us right into a massive macroeconomic brick wall. JP Morgan Chase CEO Jamie Dimon recently delivered a pretty stark warning regarding global government debt levels. He stated, "The way it's going now, it would be some kind of bond crisis, and then we'll have to deal with it." Dimon is pointing out that running massive deficits is inherently inflationary. It creates this vicious feedback loop where higher debt equals a bigger interest burden, which just feeds the cycle. To put Dimon's warning into perspective, just look at this number, $1.17 trillion. That is the amount the U.S. government has spent over what it has collected so far in fiscal 2026. Unchecked deficits pump money into the system, which keeps inflation sticky. And if inflation gets ingrained, especially with those energy supply shocks we just talked about, it becomes incredibly difficult to lower interest rates. Which leads perfectly into Section 5, the Fed's dramatic stand, defending independence. All of this pressure lands squarely on the shoulders of the Federal Reserve. On Wild Wednesday, the Fed held interest rates steady, but the internal divisions right now are historic. 4 officials actually dissented from the decision. That is the most at a policy meeting since 1992. But the truly dramatic news came from Jerome Powell himself. While his term as chair ends on May 15th, he announced an unprecedented decision to remain on the board as a governor. He explicitly cited that investigations during the Trump administration left him, in his words, with no choice but to stay on to defend the central bank's independence. Regardless of the politics of it, this move guarantees that his successor, Kevin Warsh, will inherit a deeply divided Fed while trying to navigate intense political pressure and that sticky inflation we just discussed. And finally, Section 6, Consumer Resilience, the Everyday Impact. Let's bring this sweeping macro narrative back down to earth for a minute to see how everyday consumers are handling this. And the answer is surprisingly well, for now anyway. Starbucks posted its first earnings growth since 2023, with U.S. comparable sales up 7.1%. Visa saw revenues jump 17% to $11.2 billion on really healthy spending volume. However, both of these companies noted some serious clouds forming on the horizon. Starbucks is facing major margin pressures from higher labor and coffee costs. Visa is dealing with intense competition from digital stablecoins, cryptocurrencies pegged to the dollar that offer merchants lower transaction fees, as well as political pressure for a proposed 10% cap on credit card interest rates. So the consumer is holding up, but you can absolutely feel the friction building. So we've mapped the maelstrom. We've got big tech pouring hundreds of billions into AI, an energy grid that requires staggering amounts of physical commodities just to support our digital future, and an inflationary debt load putting historic pressure on a politically embattled Federal Reserve. I want to leave you with this final provocative thought to ponder. When all of these unstoppable forces finally meet, what breaks first? Is it the AI spending spree, the physical energy grid, or the global debt load?
Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope this structured look at the data helped you see the forces shaping our world just a little bit clearer. Catch you next time.